Chapter 27, at the meeting. That weekend I hung around in the Sunday school classroom after the others filed out. When it was just Miss Winthrop and me, I cleared my throat. "Are you going to the WEC meeting this Friday?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Do you mind if I come too?" It was a whisper, but it was quiet in the classroom. I was pretty sure she heard me. "Oh, Marley, that would be wonderful!" Miss Winthrop exclaimed. I guess she had. Daddy said it was fine when I asked his permission, so Miss Winthrop and I arranged to meet at the church Friday afternoon and walked to the meeting together. The meeting was at Miss Terry's house. She was one of the founders of the WEC. From the outside, her house was large and fancy, much bigger than ours, and I was sure it was furnished with many breakable objects. I would have to be careful not to trip. Miss Terry herself opened the door. She was in her 70s, but seemed as energetic as a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. "Welcome, Marley," she said when Miss Winthrop introduced me. She led us into the living room. Miss Brewer was standing in front of a group of women sitting in folding chairs placed in neat rows. Miss Winthrop whispered that she was the chair of the WEC. Miss Brewer was about my mother's age, maybe a little bit older, and wore a tailored blouse with pearls. She reminded me of a white wine in a fancy goblet. The meeting was already in progress as Miss Winthrop and I slipped into our seats. "Remember, the Women's Emergency Committee to open our schools stands neither for segregation nor integration, but for education," Miss Brewer said. "Our sole aim is to get the 4 high schools reopened and our students back in their classes." The women nodded their approval. "Now on to new business," said Miss Brewer. "As you know, 2 days ago the school board resigned in frustration over the school situation. A new election is scheduled for December 6th. However, new candidates must file their intention to run by Saturday, November 15th, which leaves us," she looked at her watch, "just over 24 hours to find 6 candidates who believe in public education." "We have Ted Lamb," said Miss Terry. "Well, that's one." I let my eyes wander as Miss Brewer continued talking. I wasn't sure how I was going to help. I didn't know anyone who wanted to run for office. Miss Winthrop was taking notes, like it was the most fascinating discussion she'd heard in a long time. Of course, she always looked like that, even when a 5-year-old at church wanted to tell her every single kind of animal that Noah took to him on the ark. A woman sitting hunched over in a back corner caught my eye. I knew her, but I couldn't place her. She saw me looking at her, and I expected her to smile, but she didn't, just cowered back in her seat and raised her flyer in front of her face. It was Miss Dalton, JT's mother. I'd seen her once or twice before, at a football game maybe. She always reminded me of a glass of iced tea so weak you had to add a whole cup of sugar to make it taste like anything at all. The Daltons had more money than we did, and lived in a big house with a maid and a butler, and weren't really friends with my parents. But I remembered her because she had a scar over her left eyebrow, and she was shy like me. JT said once she'd got the scar when she tripped on the stairs doing a load of laundry. But that didn't make sense, because I was pretty sure a lady like that never even turned on the washing machine. They had a maid to do that, probably a colored woman who... I looked around the room. There wasn't a colored person there, except for the maid in the kitchen who was putting sandwiches on a table. The meeting adjourned a few minutes later, and Miss Terry invited everyone to have some refreshments before they left. "Grab me a cucumber sandwich, Marley?" Miss Winthrop asked. I was hungry, so I grabbed 2, and when I came back, Miss Winthrop was in deep conversation with an older woman I thought I recognized from church. All I'm saying is that it seems odd to me that we haven't invited any colored women to join the WEC. "Oh my," said the lady from church. "I'm not sure my Terrence would feel comfortable about me being here if he knew I was associating with African Americans." "But the African Americans want their schools reopened too. I'm sure they do. So wouldn't it make more sense to work with them?" Miss Winthrop asked. Before the church lady could answer, Miss Brewer came up and put a hand on Miss Winthrop's shoulder. "Would you help me in the kitchen for a moment?" "Of course." I tagged along, but I should have known she didn't really need any help, because as soon as we reached the kitchen, Miss Brewer said, Miss Winthrop, I appreciate your idealism, but admitting African American women to our group would be the end of the group. Don't you believe that schools should be integrated? Asked Miss Winthrop. Of course I do, Miss Brewer whispered, but if anyone calls me an integrationalist, half the women here will run out. And it's in everyone's best interest to get the schools reopened. I've talked to the African American leaders and explained what we are trying to do, and they understand. Well, said Miss Winthrop, I believe they told you they understand. We're all doing the best we can, said Miss Brewer. I know. All the fizz was suddenly gone from Miss Winthrop. Call me about the petitions. Miss Brewer nodded. Come on, Marley. Let's go home. On our way out the door, we ran into Miss Terry, who was talking to a lady in a fancy hat with flowers on it. I'd love to help, said the woman. You know, I've been to every meeting since the first one of September. Stephen works downtown, and if I agreed to lead a committee, my name might end up in the paper. There could be problems with his job. I understand, said Miss Terry, through her teeth, though her teeth were clenched. It was obvious to me she didn't understand. Surely the lady's husband wouldn't really lose his job. My sleeve caught on something, and I stopped, expecting I'd snag myself on a vase or statue or fancy carving. But JT's mother was clutching my sleeve. Her hand was thin and bony, like a skeleton's. It's Marley, isn't it? She said. You go to school with James Thomas? I nodded. Would you? She spoke so quietly I had to lean forward to hear her. Would you please not mention to anyone that you saw me here? I believe in public schools, but if my husband found out I was attending these meetings, The scar on her eyebrow suddenly flashed red. He wouldn't like it. I nodded again and tore myself away, like a cricket escaping from a spider web. I looked back at her, and she looked so sad. I gave her a little smile, but she did not smile in return. Miss Winthrop and I waited at the bus stop together. It was raining. We were sharing her umbrella, but my toes were still getting wet. Miss Winthrop, I asked, is Miss Brewer right? If she invited African Americans to join the WEC, would the group really fall apart? I don't know, said Miss Winthrop. Probably, but that doesn't make it right. I thought about that. Doing the right thing was harder than I expected it to be, and more confusing, too. I know it's frustrating, said Miss Winthrop, but sometimes change is slow. Will they find people to run for the school board? I asked. Miss Winthrop nodded. Miss Terry is going to work the phones tonight. I said I'd go around tomorrow to help get the petition signed. They only need 25 names for each one. That's not that many. Can I come too? I asked. Sure, Miss Winthrop smiled as the bus pulled up. I loved the company. The WEC found 5 people to run. Ted Lamb, Billy Rector, Everett Tucker, Russell Matson, and Margaret Stevens. Miss Winthrop stopped by to pick me up around 9. Her father was the third to sign the petition. Mother was busy with the wash and did not come to the door. We walked around the neighborhood, and by noon we had the names we needed. It seemed simple. A few people had refused to sign, but everyone had been polite. That afternoon I was scrubbing the toilet and doing my other chores. The phone rang. I thought it might be Liz, so I ran to answer it. It was a man's voice. Is this Richard Nipsit's daughter? Yes, I said politely. Little lover, he snapped. You better watch yourself because... I slammed down the phone. Daddy walked into the room a moment later. Who was that? I shook my head, too upset to say anything. Are you all right, Marley? I realized I was trembling. I don't feel well. Go to bed, Daddy said. I did. I closed the curtains and pulled the blankets up to my chin, but it took me a long time to stop shaking. I wanted to tell my father about the phone call, but I couldn't, because if I did, he might not let me go back to the WEC.